It's my pleasure to introduce Mike Piwowar as our lunch speaker. Mike is currently one of the SEC commissioners. He has been at other times an academic and has worked for the Senate Banking Committee. And I may be mistaken on this, but I think he may be the first PhD in finance ever to be an SEC commissioner?
The third PhD economist.
Okay.
First in finance, I believe.
Okay, so here's...
Thanks. Yeah, so thanks, Paul, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here at this great conference. As I look around the room, I see a lot of familiar faces, former colleagues, and people like you, Paul, who actually whose research influenced my decision to actually study empirical market microstructure back in the day. So, before I proceed, I need to do what everybody's expecting me to do. Say that any of the views I express today are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or my fellow commissioners, and oftentimes my views do not reflect the views of many of my fellow commissioners, so go with that. So what I want to do is just focus for about the next 15 to 20 minutes on my remarks on equity markets and specifically equity market structure, and depending upon if we have any time left and people aren't tired of hearing me speak, I can respond to questions from the audience as well too if we have some time left. In the 20 months since I began my current job, some have suggested that based upon my academic research background and some of my experience in the private and public sector, that I'm a so-called market structure expert. Now, while those comments are certainly flattering, I can't accept the compliment. Like many of you, I still consider myself a student of markets. With so many issues to examine and debate and the continued evolution of the financial markets, I think we can all agree there is more for all of us to observe and learn. It's been about 15 months since I gave my first speech as a commissioner on equity market structure. Both before and since, my colleagues at the Commission have kept the issue of market structure in the forefront through their own public remarks. Congress has also expressed keen interest in equity market structure, shining a bright light on the issue through various hearings. And we've had some unsolicited prompting by a best-selling author who, to put it lightly, does not have flattering things to say about the current state of equity markets in what many refer to as simply the book. People ask me if I've read the book, and I say yes, I did, but it actually took me a while to find it. Turns out that bookstores put it in the nonfiction section. So, given all this attention, I'm frankly disappointed that we at the Commission, at the SEC, have accomplished actually very little in moving forward on various market structure issues. But rather than merely expressing my frustration with our lack of movement in this area, what I want to do is point out a couple of positive things that the Commission has done and is continuing to do in pursuit of a market structure review. First, we've made progress with respect to a tick size pilot program for small cap companies. By way of background, such a pilot would test the benefits and costs of an alternative minimum price increment for small cap stocks, which generally have lower liquidity than other market segments. Last summer, the Commission ordered the self-regulatory organizations, SROs, so basically the exchanges plus FINRA, to develop a plan to implement the pilot. We've since published a plan for public comment. And before any pilot program can begin, the SEC has to consider the approximately 75 comments that we've received to date and evaluate whether the program as proposed by the SROs is in furtherance of the purposes of the Securities Exchange Act. Now, I understand that the staff is diligently undertaking that analysis, right, Amy? Right, Hans? And I'm hopeful that the Commission will take prompt action so a pilot can commence very soon. Second, the Commission recently finalized the composition of a Market Structure Advisory Committee that was announced by Chair White in June of last year. The committee will focus on the structure and operation of the U.S. equity markets, and the Chair has described its function as a forum and resource for reviewing specific, clearly articulated initiatives or rule proposals. Now, given the talented individuals comprising the committee, I have no doubt that they will provide the Commission with valuable insights while undertaking this narrow function. However, I believe it would be a shame to convene this group of experts and then limit the scope of the discourse from the outset. That is why I will be challenging the committee to think broadly about their mandate and what they can do to contribute to the overall market structure dialogue. As an initial matter, I believe the committee, rather than the commission, should be identifying the right questions to be asked in a market structure review. The contours of an issue that can be best explored from all angles, and we don't want to miss a key line of inquiry by ignoring the vast experiences and expertise of the committee members. In addition, the committee should recognize that its mandate grants it the authority to serve as an independent source of recommendations, instead of simply acting as a sounding board for ideas generated by the commissioners or SEC staff, or suggestions dusted off from prior discussions. We will never fully tap into the promise the committee holds unless we free it to undertake an independent analysis of the complex issues confronting us in this space. Despite some indications of progress, neither the tick size pilot nor the SEC's Market Structure Advisory Committee discussions are yet underway. Therefore, it's not too late for everyone in the room here to participate and influence the market structure debate going forward. In fact, I'd like to spend the balance of my time discussing the role of both academics and industry in charting the future course of our equity market structure. Specifically, I'd like to enlist your help as the Commission hopefully shifts from talk about equity market structure to action. The perspectives of academic market microstructure researchers will not only be important, they will be vital. Academics are too often criticized in Washington, D.C. for sitting in the proverbial ivory tower, sheltered from the practical concerns of everyday life. Surely I'm not the only one in the room that has disdain for this characterization. In fact, I've never even seen an ivory tower, but somehow. The truth is that, as you all well know, academic research can have real and measurable influence. As someone who spent time navigating the academic journal publication process myself, as well as the Washington, D.C. policy-making processes, I'd like to make a few observations about how academics can truly inform policy-making through their scholarly work, particularly in the area of market microstructure. To start, I urge you to keep policy implications in mind as you construct and conduct your research. Too often, policy implications are simply an afterthought added to an already finished working paper just prior to submitting it to a conference or a journal. In my several years in Washington, D.C., I've had the honor to serve in several capacities with the federal government, at the SEC as an economist, at the White House during 2 presidential administrations, on Capitol Hill as an economist on committee staff for 2 senators, and now back at the SEC as commissioner. For my various perches, I've been the consumer of your great work, and I know just how much academic research can enrich the policy discourse. To name just a couple of significant contributions to the equity market structure conversation from right here at the Notre Dame Mendoza School of Business, Robert Battaglio and Shane Corman's recent co-authored paper with Bob Jennings on order routing and execution quality prompted a vigorous debate on Capitol Hill, at the Commission, and elsewhere. We all know that correlation does not always imply causality, but we also know that Paul Schultz's paper with Bill Christie and their follow-up paper with Jeff Harris were associated with pronounced changes in market maker quoting behavior, as well as a criminal investigation and $1 billion settlement of a class action lawsuit. Paul, Robert, and Shane's research not only has been groundbreaking and thoughtful, but has been quite impactful, beyond the narrow meaning of something like, an impact factor as it's used by academic research journals. This may be self-evident, but to be truly impactful, you need to be visible. I encourage you to make policymakers aware of your research. Now, last night, for those of you at the dinner, Jonathan Sakobin mentioned how academic research can sometimes make policymakers uncomfortable. Please make us uncomfortable. A comfortable regulator is a dangerous regulator. To borrow a phrase from Chuck this morning, a comfortable regulator is an unnatural person. Right? Now, in terms of making policymakers aware of your research, it can be as straightforward as identifying the relevant decision makers and forwarding your papers directly to them and their staffs. Or you can contribute to the discussion by submitting comment letters to administrative agencies such as the SEC. We, for example, have a robust public comment process on each and every rulemaking, and I assure you we pay attention to what we hear. Unfortunately, the number of comments received from academics is often disproportionately low relative to other groups. I hope you will consider submitting comments that let us know how our rules and regulations stand up to what we articulated as the expected impacts, identify opportunities to further enhance the regulatory system, opine on the likely economic consequences of an action, or suggest measures of success. As you prepare any of those comment letters, please keep in mind that submissions are especially impactful when they include the empirical evidence and analysis that underlies the position being advocated. Academics are perfectly situated to make such data-driven observations. And speaking of data, I continue to be the self-appointed marketing executive for the SEC's innovative Market Information Data Analytics System, or MIDAS. How many of you here are familiar, not SEC employees, but how many of the academics are familiar with the MIDAS system or the data that's available on our website? Yeah, sort of very few, right? Check it out. Please go to the SEC's website and you'll see it's right there. You should be able to find it. MIDAS has we have data about every displayed order posted on national exchanges. The Commission uses MIDAS internally to, among other things, monitor market behavior, understand market events, and test hypotheses about the equity markets. But we also make a number of its data series freely available to the public. Please download the data, conduct analyses, and come back to us with your empirical findings. Let the Commission know whether, and if so, how, the data is useful for research and teaching purposes. Let us know how we can improve the data that we make available to the public. We promise to take the feedback constructively. Further, to the extent you have occasion to be in Washington, D.C., and you'd like to discuss your research, please reach out. Do not underestimate your ability to get a meeting with policymakers. I know that I'm not the only one at the SEC or Capitol Hill that makes every effort to meet with anyone who expresses an interest in discussing market structure issues. Schedules are challenging, but I find I'm able to accommodate a surprisingly large number of requests. And I learn more listening to academics engaged in thoughtful market microstructure research than from the usual inside the beltway suspects and all of their buzzword-laden talking points. One more seemingly obvious point: visibility and relationships lead to opportunities. It's incumbent upon us as policymakers to affirmatively reach out to you to tap into your expertise. The Commission needs to hear a diversity of viewpoints by bringing together people from academia and industry as collaborators. And we can surpass government constraints, financial and otherwise, by leveraging outside resources such as academic research. Now, Russ and I were just talking about this earlier at lunch. It's amazing that people in Washington, D.C. haven't figured out if we just give you data, you guys will do work for free, right? To this end, you might be invited to participate in roundtables hosted by the Commission or other interested parties. The SEC also offers short-term financial fellowships to work in one of our divisions, which can be mutually beneficial. In fact, I look around the room, I see a bunch of current and former SEC fellows, staff economists, and chief economists here. And I just met our newest economist, Sean O'Donoghue. Where's Sean at? Who will be joining us very soon after he gets his PhD, so welcome. The House or Senate may extend invitations to testify in hearings as a subject matter expert, as I'm looking at Rob Battaglio at the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, who did an absolutely fantastic job in a very, very tough committee with some of the senators, Senator Levin in particular, who was a very quick learner and a very hard worker, and Rob just did a fantastic job talking about their paper. And so on and so on. I implore you to accept such requests. Now, before leaving the topic, I want to briefly circle back to the SEC's current market structure initiatives. I have every expectation that the willingness of academics to serve on the SEC's Market Structure Advisory Committee will substantially improve the output. Chester, one of our former SEC chief economists, is among the members of that committee, as are two other distinguished academics, Maureen O'Hara and Andy Lowe. Their views, both individually and collectively, will certainly influence how the regulation of equity market structure evolves. Along the lines of what I've already said, however, it is important for you all to keep in mind that the Commission will not only be listening to the members of the committee to the exclusion of other voices. You can stay involved by, in a sense, speaking through your scholarly works or talking directly to Chester, Maureen, or Andy, or to the staff of the Commission, to the chair or other commissioners, or to me personally. I look forward to reading academic research papers that will study, for example, the effects of the tick size pilot program. The Commission's order directing the SROs to develop a plan to implement the pilot requires them to provide the Commission and make publicly available their assessment of the impact no later than 18 months after the beginning of the pilot. Now, I've asked Chair White to hold a public roundtable to discuss the results of their assessment, the results from academic research papers that study the pilot, and the practical application of the evidence presented. Now that I've laid out the status of the Commission efforts to evaluate the current equity market structure and the considerable assistance academics can offer by engaging with policymakers, I want to spend just a few minutes discussing another key constituency in the market structure discussion. It's the securities industry. Rather than waiting around for the SEC to finally begin tackling these complex issues, members of the securities industries are taking proactive steps with respect to equity market structure. To provide just one specific example of extensive industry engagement in this area, a petition for rulemaking was submitted to the SEC that proposes the reform of, among other things, access fees and order handling transparency. We received a number of white papers that discuss and make recommendations on a range of key issues. For its part, NASDAQ designed and is currently conducting an access fee pilot. This experimental pricing program, which is limited to 14 stocks, lowers the access fee on NASDAQ from 30 cents per 100 shares to 5 cents per 100 shares and reduces rebates for the liquidity provision. The pilot is generating data about how lower access fees can affect the quality of markets for investors and public companies, as well as the level of off-exchange trading, price discovery, trading costs, and displayed liquidity. NASDAQ has committed to periodically share the results of the program. And by the way, if anyone in the audience has been studying the NASDAQ access fee pilot and cares to share their preliminary findings, please find me after lunch. Because private enterprises are far more nimble than the government, initiatives like NASDAQ's that are voluntarily taken are much more efficient than commission programs. Such experiments, whether they produce results favorable or unfavorable to the theories being tested, will have true value as a supplement to what we at the Commission may be trying. By mentioning the NASDAQ pilot, as well as the SEC's tick size study, I do not mean to overstate the role of pilots or be interpreted as supportive of any and all pilots under any and all circumstances. To be clear, pilots initiated by the Commission or an industry participant have limitations. As we all know, the design matters. Which securities are included, the control samples, the duration, the data collected, etc. We must also be mindful that pilots also impose costs on market participants. Careful cost-benefit analyses must be conducted before and during the implementation of any pilot program to ensure that investors or issuers are not unduly harmed. Finally, it's worth noting that structured pilots are not the only way to evaluate equity market structure issues, or that market participants can participate in the discussion. We continually see new entrants into the market that challenge the existing business landscape, which then serve as natural experiments. In this way, market dynamics themselves will ultimately show whether a new approach has positive or negative impacts on market quality measures, reveals insights about the market structure generally, or exposes a market imbalance created by regulation. Now let me close with the words of someone I hear is still pretty popular around here, Lou Holtz. Quote, I never learn anything talking. I only learn things when I ask questions, unquote. With respect to a review of equity market structure, the SEC can only get so far through internal discussion and debate. We will be posing a lot of questions, and I hope the academic community and industry will continue to provide us with vital answers to those questions, vital data, analysis, and feedback. Thank you for your attention. Do we have time for some questions, or? I reserve the right to not answer questions based upon who raises their hands. Amy, no questions. Yeah.
In design of pilot, have you ever thinking if some firms have been selected as a pilot group to increase their tick size, they may have incentive to reverse split, actually to bypass. The literature shows when all the tick size change.
Right.
All the firms, they will not manage that, but that's slightly different when you say that, hey, it has been treated.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite, I don't foresee that being a huge problem in this space, but perhaps, that could happen in some way. But what that suggests is that we need to make sure that the samples that we have, in particular control samples, have to be big enough, right? So we always want to make sure that we have large enough samples to control for things like mergers and acquisitions, firms going private, all those. That would be another thing particularly on the list. But what you're pointing out is it may be a consequence directly of the pilot itself, maybe causing changes in behavior. But yeah, something.
But that can be good because then that becomes
Yeah.
a pilot for reverse split.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chuck.
Has the commissioner ever considered doing something like what the Canadians did with the RFP and the hedge fund data? Just giving an RFP and say, look, we're, submit some proposals, we'll give you some data on this issue we care about. Is that on the
Yeah, I haven't heard any. I'm looking at I have my counsel here, Richard. I carry a lawyer with me everywhere.
yesterday,
Yeah.
did a paper from that guy that has a paper,
Yeah. No, I mean, I mean, reaching out directly more to industry, I think would be very, very favorable. There are some sort of legal constraints that the commission has to work through in terms of going out to industry and quote unquote asking for things, right? And there's certain legal things where we can't compel, folks in the industry to give us information. But even voluntarily, does that give the impression that we're compelling these certain things? But there's certainly ways around it in which we could do it. I mean, one of the things, the UK has this thing called the Foresight Program, where it's the Treasury Department and various other parts of the government there, where they engage not only academics but industry participants to then voluntarily give data over and work together. And they work together on a compendium of some white papers and some other things that have studied sort of the future of computerized trading. I think that would be a potentially neat model to actually think about going forward as well too. But this is the Canadians did this in terms to the hedge. This is something I wasn't aware of, so this is cool.
It's self-regulator, Investment Industry Organization of Canada, so they actually collect a lot of market surveillance data, so it's kind of their data. And they issue, they call it request for assistance. So they didn't reach out to industry, but to academics. In fact, they didn't take anyone from the industry, and we couldn't work with anybody.
Industry, yeah. I'm looking at former chief. Have we done so? I know the CFTC had sort of like a special call for data and some of their regulated entities back in the day. But no, that's good. I mean, and any suggestions you have? What's that? I missed the joke. What was this?
I said you don't want to go there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah.
So
No question from Craig.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So consolidated audit trail.
Yeah.
Do you have a feeling for what the horizon date it might be for that actually being launched? And are you planning to do anything to sort of champion making that data?
Yeah, I believe it's on schedule for the year 2065. On this one, right? No, so this, right, so you're folks familiar with this, right? So there's this huge effort going on right now with respect to what's called the consolidated audit trail, which you'll be getting. It's kind of like the OATS data plus a bunch of other things, effectively all the blue sheeting data as well too. And right now there's a consortium of folks who are trying to figure out the governance of who's going to actually, how we're going to select who gets to be the provider of the data for this, and then actually all the issues related to that. And it's a very long process. There's a number of sort of deadlines that are coming up. It's a yearly long process. But some people are of the opinion sooner rather than later, we got to get this data out. I'm more of the opinion of we've got one chance to get this right? And so I'm a little more flexible in terms of the timing of the issues from some folks. The other thing is I just was meeting with some folks in Chicago that are proprietary traders and then also members of SIFMA, so the broker-dealers. And they're sort of outside members in what's called sort of an advisory group in this, and there's various concerns that they have that their voices are being heard in the process as well too. So I don't want to have sort of artificial deadlines where we can get this done as quick as possible, and then on the back end going, oh, we should have thought of this and should have thought of that. The back office folks are really vocal in terms of they want to be part of the discussion, because what they don't want to have happen is the exchanges all get together and say, this is how we're going to do it, and then all of a sudden the back office folks go like, well, that's going to cost $1 gazillion. If you would have done it this way, we could have done it for half $1 gazillion or something like that. So, I mean, it's moving along, but it's, you know, it's slow and frustrating and that sort of stuff. But we'll see when we get there. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your generous comments, and I applaud particularly your comments on give academics a bunch of data and then they can do research for free.
For free, yeah.
I'd like to ask your comments on the policy of the SEC and of their response to FOIA requests.
No comment. Oh, on that, I only use SEC email. I don't have a private email server. So if you want to FOIA my emails, I got them all on that. So
I've got a bunch of them, and typically I get a response the same day from a lawyer with very technical language saying we cannot possibly accommodate anything whatsoever.
yeah. So are these like for data requests
Yes.
or other sorts of things in there? Yeah. No, we've got an entire FOIA office that just sort of handles, you know, a lot of those requests and stuff. If you want to do really good research, come visit the SEC, be a fellow, right? You get access to a lot of good data that way. I think maybe Amy's the one who rejects all those requests, so that she gets people that she left. So yeah, she left. Yeah, she's out there denying one of your requests right now, so she can actually get folks to come join the SEC. So. Yes. Oh no.
Thinking about pushing 605 onto the broker, that sounds like it's a pretty easy thing to do.
Yeah. So
Make it a
605.
whole lot easier and maybe breaking out things and making it a little bit easier for the retail investor to make comparisons.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through issues, right? That's on the list of things that we're actually going to be looking at, 605 and 606 type issues. Where's Chris at? I can see him over the big advocate of that sort of stuff, been in talking about that as well too. It's on the list of things that we're trying to look at. I know it was on the list. It was in Chair White's speech, I believe, in last June, as something specifically to look at as well too. I think there's a lot of consensus around making that data more usable, more standardized. One of the other thing is having the historical data available, right? Because of when people put them up, and then it's unless you have academics that have been collecting this data forever, right? It kind of like disappears.
What about option markets?
So what about them?
Pushing it to those.
Oh, pushing them as well. That's good. Yeah, good point. Yeah. So it's on the list of things I think for us coming up over the next time, and we'll probably get to it probably this decade, hopefully, at the usual speed. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, after Cat's done, we'll get to it. Yeah. Is that it? All right. Thank you all very much.